desire, and I long to worship thee. And I long to worship
In the ancient world, if you wanted to find your God, you went to a temple. Every culture had them. The Babylonians had their ziggurats. The Egyptians had temples and pyramids. The Romans had temples with gods all over the place. Even if you went to the games, say to the arena on a Saturday, just to watch people play games and race, there would be gods everywhere, statues of gods everywhere. But if you were a Jew, it was different. If you were a Jew, there was only one place in the world you could go to find your God, and that was the temple in Jerusalem. It was massive. The entire building stood high above the rest of the city. The entire complex, which we see here, was the size of 15 football fields. King Herod, the same one who was alive when Jesus was born, he had started this renovation, and it had lasted for 80 years, long past his death. He made it one of the wonders of the known world. Even the Romans found it impressive. There was a massive courtyard which could fit thousands of people. And they came, especially for the high holidays, which happened 3 times a year, they came with goats and sheep and doves, and they came to have these animals sacrificed to God as an atonement for their sins. They would hand the animal over a short gate to a whole lineup of priests, and they would take it and skin it and take out the innards and put it onto a burning altar. And you'd see the smoke go up, and then you'd get the rest of the animal handed back to you. You could go home and cook it. Your religious duties fulfilled. But nobody went inside the temple itself, the tall building in that courtyard, except for the priests. And there was one room inside called the Holy of Holies, where it was believed that God's Spirit dwelt. This was God's house, God's only house on earth. It was beautiful, massive, and impressive. And for that reason, no Jew, including the disciples, could ever imagine it being destroyed. They had gone to the temple their entire lives and would do so even after Jesus was gone. So they are shocked when Christ says it will all come down someday. But Christ was right. In the year 70, some 40 years after he died, the temple was completely destroyed. A rebellion led by Jewish leaders had taken over Jerusalem, had taken it back from Roman control. This is not something the Romans liked, so they sent in a massive army to take back the city. And when they did so, they killed thousands of people, crucified them, slaughtered them in the streets. They burnt the city and they burnt down the temple and stole what was inside of it, taking back thousands of Jews in chains back to Rome as slaves. The fall of the temple caused a seismic shift in the history of religion. After the temple was gone, Jews debated whether it would be still okay to sacrifice to God anywhere else. A few thought it was, and they kept it up for a generation or two. But after that, people said no. There's no more sacrificing. Without the temple, that's over. And the Christians who had gone to the temple and made sacrifices even after Christ's death, they stopped too. And that meant that when the Christians took over the Roman Empire with their faith in the 300s and the 400s, that slowly brought an end to sacrifices by everybody. So when that one building came down, it ended a form of religious observance which had once been common across all faiths. But starting with the fall of the temple, Jews, then Christians, and then the Romans gave up animal sacrifice. And that's why in churches like this today, we don't see any place for animals' bodies or burning or barbecuing. That's all over now because this one building fell. This may all sound like ancient history, but we moderns still place a lot of faith in our buildings and can be shocked and bewildered when they fall. 2 days ago was the 19th anniversary of 9/11. Everyone who was alive that day remembers where they were when they saw those terrifying images of the two towers in Manhattan falling. It's not too much of an exaggeration to describe the World Trade Center as a kind of temple for the secular age. Certainly the terrorists saw it that way. They felt they were taking down the temple of American capitalism. And the Americans reacted as though a temple had been taken down, waging 2 wars, changing the way we fly, creating the Homeland Security Agency, stoking a renewed distrust of immigrants, in particular of Muslims. But historians may remember this pandemic as being the crisis that really brought down the temples of our time. If you go downtown on any weekday now and look up into the buildings, say on Bay Street or down near the TD Center, you'll find that there's nobody in them, or barely anyone. There's the skeleton staffs in those buildings, that's it. Everybody else has been sent home. It turns out that those great gleaming temples, which seemed so permanent and indestructible, had one Achilles heel: their elevators. Those small little rooms that we need to stand in, close to each other, to get to the 10th, the 20th, the 30th, the 40th floor. Perfect traps for contagion. And now, the perfect way to undermine and bring down these temples. The result has been a massive shift in where people work. Before the pandemic, only around 5% of people worked full-time from home. Now that number is closer to 50% in many cities. This is truly an unprecedented situation. Companies have been surprised to find that workers actually can be quite productive at home. Many report that productivity has even increased. So now, some corporations are thinking about maybe making this temporary arrangement permanent. Twitter and Facebook have both said that their employees can just stay home indefinitely. Here in Canada, in Ottawa, in the Rogers Centre, you know those call centers that you call up? Why isn't my internet working properly? Well, they let a lease go and they had 350 call center employees go home. And there's another 7,000 that they employ who may well face the same fate. Here in Toronto, the major banks have said to their employees, stay home, at least until 2021. And of course, that has a knock-on effect for all of their clients. So it looks like in the white-collar sector, it's always been true that the major expenses are labor on the one hand, but office space on the other. And now it looks like office space isn't so necessary. So companies looking to save money are seeing an opportunity by sending workers home. This may become the new normal even once the pandemic subsides. The gleaming temples of our capitalist society are suddenly falling, and a new kind of work is emerging in their place. But will working at home be good for workers? What will it be like if a large section of the working population is forced to work in the same space where they live? Studies have found that people who like working at home are generally people who have a dedicated room for their office. Maybe they take a guest room and they turn it into their office. But in Toronto, that's not an option for a lot of people. About half of Torontonians rent. So that means most of them are renting apartments and condos. And condos have steadily shrunk in size over the last 20 years. In 2016-17, the average size of a condo was 647 square feet, which is an okay size for a one-bedroom condominium, but it doesn't leave any room for an office as a separate space. There are condos in Toronto that are 280 square feet. So when companies tell workers, just stay home, work from home, often what that means is just work from the kitchen table or work from your couch. And the bigger problem is how people feel. The bigger problem is how people feel when they work at home. It gets lonely. Almost 1/3 of all households now have just one person living in them. It's the single most common living arrangement in Canada. So when companies tell workers to stay home, a large number of them will be living alone in small apartments and condos. For these people, going to work was the one guaranteed social interaction that they had. And now that is going away. And it won't just be a problem for single people. Studies have found that about 30% of people who are married aren't happy in their marriages. So the prospect of spending 24 hours a day in your apartment with someone who you don't really get along with is no picnic. Even before the pandemic hit, experts in the West were saying that we have a loneliness epidemic. In 2018, the British government actually appointed a minister of loneliness to the federal cabinet. In the United States, studies show that about 25% of Americans report feeling lonely. And that was before they were cut off from going to the office. Polls have found during the pandemic that about 70% of workers wouldn't mind going to the office all the time or at least part of the time. And one rather interesting measure of how much people miss going to the office comes from an unexpected source. Back in April, a Swedish sound studio put together a playlist of office sounds. You know, the sound of a printer working or phones ringing, the clickety-clack of fingers on keyboards. They made a playlist of it and they put it up on Spotify as a joke. Well, 6 months later, that playlist has been accessed over 500,000 times. And from the data, it appears that people put it on probably while they're working at home, just so that they can have the sound of being around other people and being back at the office. After the pandemic ends, we will be facing a pandemic of loneliness. Working at home is going to leave people feeling socially disconnected and trapped. And it will hurt. As spiritual people, we know that how we feel influences everything about our lives. It influences the quality of our relationships with others. It influences how our body is. It influences our mental health. People who feel cut off and lonely are at a higher risk of depression, dementia, and premature death. Studies have found that feeling lonely is worse for you than being obese, and it's the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So while sending people home may be good for the bottom line, it's not going to be good for their bodies or their souls. We're going to take an existing problem and amplify it. So what can be done now that our corporate temples are emptying out? Now that our corporate temples are emptying out. Well, 2,000 years ago, when Jews and pagans alike went to their temples, they didn't go inside. They just brought their sacrifices to the priests, and the priests did all the things that they needed to do to feed the sacrifices to the gods. And the priests were the only ones who went inside the actual temple building. But Christians changed the rules when they started opening churches in the 4th century. They opened the entire building to the faithful. They came in the doors, they came inside so that they could hear sermons, so that they could pray together and sing together. People were finally brought inside temples. And it's time to do that again. All over the city, there are churches like ours which are right in the middle of residential neighborhoods. Our churches are within easy walking distance, usually of hundreds of homes. And in this particular neighborhood, we are surrounded by people who are white-collar workers, people who are probably going to be working home for the next couple of years, possibly for the rest of their working lives. People who are going to get lonely. people who need social interaction if they're going to stay healthy. And we have the space to make it possible for them to have that community, to have those chances to socialize. Now, does that mean that they'll all be Christians? No, probably not. But that's not important. We're not here to just fill our building with Christians and renters. We're here to be good neighbors, to be faithful people, to make Christianity happen, which means we have an opportunity to extend our love of our fellow people to the neighborhood by opening our doors. Imagine our church during the week having people hanging out in the library, just having coffee, freelancers' teas, people having exercise classes in the gym, people using the sanctuary during the week, which is mostly empty the vast majority of the time. This building is in a perfect position to be able to help people who are lonely feel socially connected again. And studies have found that even a modest amount of social interaction makes a big, big difference. A little bit can go a long way. Now that the temples of capitalism are falling into irrelevance, we can help the people who have become office exiles. And this change can start with you, our congregants. You know this building. You know what kind of rooms we have. I encourage you to use this building more. If you've got some friends you'd like to hang out with in a socially distanced, safe way, give us a call. We'll set up a room for it. I would like this building to be more permeable, to let people in. Let's share the love we have with people who are going to need it, who are going to need face-to-face interaction. At first, yes, it's true, we'll all have masks on. But in the years to come, that will fade away, hopefully, fortunately. But people will still be lonely. And we can play a part in reducing their loneliness. Christ predicted that the temple of his time would fall, and it did, even though no one else expected it. Our secular temples are falling under very strange circumstances that none of us could have predicted, but they are emptying out. And people need refuge. Christ said that we are with him anytime we offer help to the sick, to the naked, to the prisoner. And now I think we should add the lonely to that list. Let's open the doors of our temple to them, to be a source of comfort and compassion, to let Christ's Spirit be here for everyone who walks in our doors. Amen.